I'm your host, Michael Shermer. Before I introduce today's guest, our sponsor is the Great Courses Plus app on the phone. It looks like this. You touch the app on your screen right there, and it opens right up. This is the course I'm going to listen to this week. It's called The Art of Debate. The professor is Jared Atchison, and there's 24 lectures. They're 30 minutes each. I usually listen to them at 1.2 speed, so it gets them down to about 20 minutes each, which is perfect for driving, working out, chores, whatever. Just moving about your day. I could consume this entire course in a week, plus do an audiobook. So the deal with the Great Courses, as you know, the teaching company has produced great courses for decades. Their new program now is streaming on their app, lectures that you can access from all the different courses that they offer, and dozens of lectures in each of the courses. You don't have to listen to them in order. You can skip around. You can listen to a few and then skip to new courses. Anyway, it's a great deal. As you know, I'm a big fan of online content consumption, which has gotten ever larger in the COVID pandemic. And so here's the deal. If you subscribe to their program, you get $30 off for the year, and it comes out to about $10 a month. Okay, that is a great deal. $10 a month for unlimited knowledge through these highly professionally produced college courses, and you can get that through thegreatcoursesplus.com/Shermer. That is, go to thegreatcoursesplus.com/Shermer. You'll get $30 off for the annual plan. It comes out to about $10 a month. It's a great deal. Okay, my guest today is Dr. Jason Hill. He's a professor of philosophy and honors distinguished faculty at DePaul University in Chicago. He is the author of Becoming a Cosmopolitan: What It Means to Be a Human Being in the New Millennium, Beyond Blood Identities, Post-Humanity in the 21st Century, We Have Overcome, an Immigrant's Letter to the American People. Here it is, the book I'll be discussing with him initially today. And his next book is What Do White Americans Owe Black People? Racial Justice in the Age of Post-Oppression. That book comes out later in 2021, so I'll probably have him back on the show for that, because reparations is back in the news as a viable topic for a lot of people to discuss, in as much as the government has been cutting checks all 2020 to bail people out from the loss of their work because of COVID. And so if the government can do that, why can't it hand out trillions of dollars in checks to Black Americans for the racial injustice done to them? Anyway, that's the argument. So we'll be discussing that a little bit today, as well as going through all the different racism and anti-racism books that are on the New York Times bestseller list. I read 3 of them, and so I'm going to ask for his comments on those, as well as his own case. He is a gay, Black immigrant from Jamaica who has made it himself very successful in America. How did he do that? If America is just this racist cesspool where blacks are suppressed right and left, how does that happen? I'll ask his thoughts on that. And then we also get into the achievement gap, the Princeton racism letter, the subjects of race and IQ. What is race as a concept? White guilt, Black families and fatherless homes. What does a Black body mean? This comes up a lot in these books. Political correctness, the Black Lives Matter movement, and training and sensitivity programs that colleges and universities and corporations are all scrambling to adopt to do their share to combat this racist problem, or alleged problem. We'll see what he thinks about that. So with that, I give you Jason Hill. Thanks for coming on the show. Your book is We Have Overcome, an Immigrant's Letter to the American People. I have to say, Jason, I was deeply moved by your book. It was so inspirational, in part because I had just put myself through reading, Ken Day's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, Isabel Wilkinson's book, Caste, and Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, Between the World and Me. And, these are very well-written books. Obviously, they're considered literary masterpieces, but my overall impression, it was just so depressing to just read this like litany of America as this racist cesspool of hatred of blacks, and just on with anecdote after anecdote after anecdote. And it was just so refreshing to have your book that basically, so here's what I tweeted. I don't know if you saw my tweet, but I posted
No, I didn't.
I posted the cover of your book, and I said, highly recommended. Black gay Jamaican immigrant goes to Georgia in 1985 for the American dream. He's told, you can't because of racism. He responds, I don't care. I'll succeed anyway. And then he's told, racists will try to stop you. And he responds, let them try. And then I pretended I was one of the racists. Leave this one alone. He's bad to the bone. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. I mean, I want to get a little bit into those other books in a little bit, but, I was hoping to have the authors on the podcast, but I couldn't even get a response from the publicists, let alone the authors. And then I see they refuse to engage with John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry and Coleman Hughes. And I thought, well, I have no chance of getting these authors on my podcast, because I did want to try to steel man their arguments. So we'll try to do that. I know their impression, their attempts at discussing these issues was not to make black people feel helpless, but that's the impression I got, was like, you stand no chance of making it in America. So my first question would be, then how is it you have like the number one best-selling book in America? How is it you're a professor here? How is it that you won the Pulitzer Prize and you write for the New York Times? If America is such a racist cesspool, how come you're so successful? Anyway, I don't think I'm going to get an answer to that. But so let's start with your story, because I think it addresses one of my favorite quotes that I like to begin this conversation with, from President Lyndon Johnson back in 1964. You know the quote very well, of course. Freedom is not enough. You do not take a person who for years has been hobbled by chains and liberate him, bring him up to the starting line of a race, and then say, you're free to compete with all the others, and still justly believe that you've been completely fair. I think to a lot of people, it's like, yeah, okay, I get that. I understand that seems right. So we got to do something. Anyway, so let's tell us your story and how you would respond to a claim like that.
Well, before I get to my story, I would just say that's a story where there's a very, very hidden agenda involved in that message, because what he's implicitly suggesting is equality of results, which is something called equity. And it's a form of egalitarianism, of course, that has taken root in this country. And outside, I think, of the political realm, where we all enjoy equal standing before the law, we're not equal. We're not equal in intelligence. We're not equal in physical strength. We're not equal in beauty. I know there are lots of beautiful people who enjoy beauty privilege. I lift my hat to them. We're not equal in frugality, and we're not equal in moral prudence. So the idea somehow that you can somehow micromanage the universe for a set of people who had been unfairly disadvantaged in the past is a bunch of malarkey. What we value first and foremost are freedom and liberty. And in a constitutional republic, short of a bloated totalitarian state, that's all that we can really grant to minorities: freedom and liberty to make your way, but to sort of hold dear to this idea of equity, that is, from unequal talents and unequal capabilities, we can also manufacture equal results. It's a very dangerous idea that not many people are aware of. I mean, they hear equity and they think, oh, that's a wonderful thing. You mean equality? And it's translated as equal outcomes that are derived from equal opportunities. So that's how I would respond.
Yeah. So the difference between, say, positive rights and negative rights, that is to say, you have a right to expect from the government to protect your property, to protect your freedom to speak and practice whatever religion you want, and so on. But that's a different kind of right than I need a lift up, or I need some boots so I can lift myself up by my bootstraps, or I need, some kind of boost here to get to that starting line. You're making a distinction between those kinds of rights.
That's right. So long as the government places no obstruction, or the state places no obstructions in your path towards enhancing your life, you really cannot ask of society, which is it's an aggregate. It's a bunch of individual men and women that constitute society. You can't encroach. Your needs and your wants do not, I think, constitute a mortgage on their lives and on their efforts. And freedom is a milieu in which we matriculate and in which we strive to make something of our lives. But this idea that somehow we can all be equal is a child's fantasy, I think, because we're not equal.
You're an individualist, as am I. I make the point in the moral arc that it's like with the right to vote. It's not that races have a right to vote or genders have a right to vote. It's individual blacks or individual women or individual whoever that actually votes, because it's individuals that suffer and can be damaged. Therefore, it's the state must protect the individual, not the group. So it's that individual versus collective founding starting point that you begin with.
That's right.
I was thinking about white privilege. So I'm supposed to check my white privilege, right? So I check it. It's doing just fine. Okay, so I make a little joke about that. But I have been thinking about it. It's like there's no privilege to being white other than I'm not being obstructed in my freedom to do what I want, to pursue and be as successful or not as I like. So it's not really a privilege. It's just that I'm not being held back. So I think it's a misconstrual to say white privilege as opposed to what? If there's been oppression, say black oppression, well, then yeah, we need to end that for sure, discrimination and redlining and so forth. But let's not pretend that once those are gone, then then you get privilege. It's not privilege. It's just now you're free.
No, you're free. And what about poor? I have 4 college degrees, 2 undergraduates, a master's, and a PhD. I enjoy something called educational privilege. What am I supposed to do? Cognitively dumb down myself and sound like a village idiot or a grunting farm animal? Even if white people have certain privileges because they're white, what are they supposed to do about it? Adopt blackface? Well, you can get thrown in jail for that. So long as you don't use whatever sort of privileges that you enjoy in the world to denigrate and demean and eviscerate other people of their dignity, I see no problem with it. And the thing about white privilege is that it's a much more complex phenomenon, because I don't think that a poor white person in Appalachia today, without any teeth, without any access to dental health or medical health resources, or access to legal resources, I certainly do enjoy some of the privileges that I do as a educated middle class professional. So it's a very complicated phenomenon, and I just don't like the way that it's banded about to sort of induce wholesale guilt in white people. I think Ta-Nehisi Coates and some of these systemic nihilists are out to really abolish. When they call it abolish whiteness, they really mean that the annihilation of white people from the planet. And I think it's just a sort of euphemistic term that's used, really. This notion of white privilege, when you really unpack it, there is something quite nefarious in the way it's used socially.
Yeah, I read Hillbilly Elegy and then Educated. And, these are communities of poor white people who you just described. And they have to be listening to this going, what privilege? I have no education, no teeth, whatever. Where's my privilege? They got to be saying, well, we know what they did. In part, they voted for Trump, amongst the various reasons for Trump's presidency. That's probably one of them.
Right.
Yeah. Let me just read your opening page of your book, which is addressed my fellow Americans. You wrote this in 2018, which is interesting. We live in an era of deep resentment, envy, and hatred of our great and noble nation. It has become fashionable within certain circles of the United States of America to malign our republic as an imperialist, racist, and white supremacist country that exploits its racial minorities and keeps them outside the pantheon of the human community in the domain of the ethical. Our celebrated writers and intellectuals pen books that receive accolades by critics who claim that America is ruled by majoritarian pigs and that the American dream is the nefarious fabrication of white racists who have used it to exploit blacks. Some have claimed that the concept of the dream itself is false and that it is predicated on a specious hope that ought to be rejected by all Americans, but more specifically by black Americans. We live in an age of militant Americaphobia. Jason, how do you really feel? I'm not sure about that.
Right. But I make myself any clearer.
Well, I mean, you wrote that
Yes.
3
Yes.
years ago now. It seems like it's gotten even worse.
Well, it's gotten the anti-Americanism has
Yeah.
gotten worse, and I must just say to your listeners that one of the reasons I wrote that book is because I came to America at the age of 20 from Jamaica with a green card, and I became an American citizen subsequently. But I'm a great patriot. I love this country. I probably love it more than the country of my birth, for political reasons, for ideological reasons, and for the simple fact that I respect its basic and fundamental foundational values. And I grew very sick and tired of hearing the kind of swill and invectives and the vitriol directed at this country. And I said, I have to write a book to let the American people know that, first, America is an unprecedented phenomenon in the history of world civilizations. It's not a society or it's not a culture, it's a civilization. Just as I have written in the book about the greatness and extraordinary magnificence of Jewish civilization. There are civilizations, and America has a civilization that is worth defending and has a people who I think are very, very extraordinary and exceptional. And that was the motivation. I grew sick and tired of the Ta-Nehisi Coates of this world and the Cornel Wests and other people on the very alt-left who were denigrating my adopted country. And I needed to pen a defense to inoculate them against the lies, really, and the smear attacks against this country.
Have your critics said, well, you're not originally from Black America and its slavery history. You're from Jamaica. Therefore, you got an unfair advantage of some kind or something to help you be successful?
Well, they say many things. None of them have come close enough to me to say too much because I think they're a little bit afraid of the kind of verbal onslaught they might get. But I mean, in all fairness, I'm not sure what they say. What I've heard is that I didn't sit in the back of a bus, and I didn't, and I grant some credence to that. That I didn't grow up under Jim Crow, and I wasn't exposed to some of the indignities, of course, that blacks have been exposed to and continue to be exposed to. I mean, I've lived here for 35 years. I've had my fair share of racism. But what I try to communicate in this book, We Have Overcome, is that in America today, and I still feel this way quite strongly, and I felt it 35 years ago when I came here at the age of 20, is that race is no longer a determinant of one's destiny, as it once was during slavery, and as it might have been to some extent during Jim Crow. And I say might have been because there were several blacks under legal segregation who still managed to navigate through the world and make something quite superlative of their lives. But today, I emphatically think that race is no longer a determinant of one's destiny. If you graduate from high school and do not have children out of wedlock, you can make something of your life.
Yeah.
And so I try to show the immigrant experience that there are immigrants who, such as myself in the book, I came here with $120 in my pocket and had to start from scratch and work 3 jobs, like a lot of other immigrants, before I got a scholarship to do my PhD. And that we encountered racism, but we dealt with it episodically or situationally on the spot and didn't use those moments to cull a victim identity. That is, you encounter racism, you deal with it, you rectify a problem, you move on into the world. That doesn't make you into a permanent, iconic victim, which incidentally stamps you, I think, with imprimatur of innocence. Because if you're a victim, it connote some sort of innocence that you have, which shields you from criticism of any sort. And this is the other thing with these Black critics like Ta-Nehisi Coates, who can write a hateful diatribe against America, and masochistic liberal whites give him, I think he got the National Book Award and all sorts of accolades, because they enjoy this sort of flagellation by someone who can tell them off and make them feel quite guilty. It's a weird relationship I have to my critics, because they dress me in a sort of circuitous way and say, well, his experience is not really the Black experience, because yes, he is an immigrant. But, and I think to some extent, I do bring a certain kind of cultural capital to America, having been brought up in a certain environment. But at the end of the day, I still am perceived as Black, and I still face the same sort of problems that any person might face, that being in a university for 4 years and being the only Black person in almost all of my classes. That comes with some problems with it, but you deal with them, and you move forward. It's the ethos and it's a philosophy that you adopt that will get you through life. You have to have and that's what I try to communicate, and we have overcome. You must have a particular ethos and a particular philosophy that integrates your life, by which you live, that inoculates you, and also strengthens you and gives you some sort of guidance to navigate through the tragic waters that you find yourself swimming in, among them being racism. But I also get in trouble when I say racism is not the worst problem afflicting America today. There are other kinds of isms. And, people just don't really want to hear that, because they think racism is the most metaphysically, or existentially, I should say, threatening thing that is like a malignant cancer that's eating up the culture. And I just don't see America in those terms anymore.
Yeah, you make the point. We're not living in 1950s America anymore. There's too much black and white thinking here that, if there's a single racist cop that gets caught on a video that goes viral, then we go, oh, we're back to 1950s America. No, we're not. I mean, it's never going to be zero. There's always going to be some racist asshole who does something, says something, is violent or whatever. That's never going to be zero. So there's always going to be those kind of viral videos. But what we need is data.
Right.
Like you cite the polls about interracial marriage. I like to say to my students, remember when interracial marriage was, the ban on interracial marriage was a thing, and they're like, what? Yeah, that was illegal until 1967 in the United States. Illegal.
That's right.
And I think you had a stat of only 4% of Americans agreed that it's okay, approved of interracial marriage. Now that I don't think pollsters even ask anymore, because who in their right mind would say no? Right? That's how far we've come. And yeah, I'm sure there's somebody out there would go, yes, I think it's wrong for blacks and whites to marry. You could find somebody, but so what?
Yes. Right. I mean, those people I just think are social ballast, and we just ignore them. They have no power to sort of prevent us from carrying on with our lives, and they have their right to their beliefs, and they should have the right to hold those beliefs, any beliefs they want. I mean, sometimes they don't dare to translate them in the public sphere and contravene on the rights of your rights and my rights. These are what John Stuart Mill used to call the inconveniences of living in a free society. You have to tolerate the people who want to elevate their sophomoric high school opinions to the level of human knowledge.
That's a great way to put it. Yes, your opinion that we never landed on the moon is not equal to mine that we did, which is obvious. But if you go to like historical deconstructionism, where we never really know the truth about what happened in the past, it's all just stories. They're just kind of literary tropes, and they don't have any objective meaning. Oh, yes, so my theory that the Holocaust never happened is equal to yours that it did? Oh, no, I don't mean to go that far. It's like, yeah, okay. So we do know some objective truths about the past. Well, yes. But so your point is,
they're very selective.
Your point is, first of all, your point is that, of course, things have gotten much better, and they have. And that there's still some racist victimization going on, but it's not the acts themselves that you're concerned about. It's how people respond to them. So without like Isabella Wilkinson's book is just filled with anecdotes about, just bad things that people said to her because she's black, or the way they looked at her, or whatever. And I don't have any reason to doubt that these things happened, even in 1990s and 2000s. But I guess the question is okay, now what? Are you going to inculcate that into your character? I am a victim, and therefore the incident itself that we would say, yeah, you were a victim of racism when that guy said that racist thing to you. Yes, that happened. But so what? Now what? And that's your point, right? That if you just hang on to that, you're giving over your agency to that person.
Exactly. Why not look at it this way? So long as they don't have some sort of institutional power over you, why not look at it as racism is a form of psychosis? It's a misperception of reality. You're being misperceived into something that you're not. And why grant metaphysical power to a psychotic? Actually, I'd rather that person sort of wish that person well in life, so long as they don't harm them. But if someone looks at me and I perceive them to be a racist, or looking at me because I'm black in a certain way, the person is a psychotic, and it's a sort of mental arrested development that they're suffering from. And there's no way that I'm going to grant them that much metaphysical power over my agency and call a victim ideology or identity based on a mental problem that they're suffering from.
Yeah.
It's granting those races too much power over my life.
Yeah.
And I want more blacks to hear this and to really digest it. And it's not to excuse racist behavior. It's just not to get hyperbolic and too sentimental or emotional. Emotion is the word I want to use. Not to get too emotional about it. They're just human beings who have stupid beliefs. And there are a multiplicity of stupid beliefs that we have to navigate among in our lives. And racist beliefs are just one of those set of beliefs. And again, so long as you have the equality before the law and you enjoy that equality, so be it.
Right. Yes, it's better.
We can't control the universe, right? We can't. It's
right.
utopianistic.
Yeah. Here's a quote from you wrote about Ta-Nehisi Coates in your first two chapters. His book is Between the World and Me. So it's a letter to his son, essentially. You wrote a letter to America. He wrote a letter to his son. And I just thought, oh, this poor kid. I mean, he's basically being told, you have next to no chance of succeeding in America because it's such a racist pit. And actually, I don't think I'm gonna read these quotes because they go on and on. He's quite the literary stylist, but it's sort of the core message. I think you maybe even hinted it's almost like child abuse, telling this kid, you're going to fail because look at all these racists out there.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are not racist anymore. Most want to do the right thing. And second, you're kind of setting somebody up for failure. You get a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
Life is hard enough, even if you're confident and you go out there with all your best skills and positive thinking, and you're still going to fail a lot of times. That's just because of entropy. There's just far more ways for things to go wrong than to go well. So you just have to expect failure than normal. But if you go into that with that kind of negative attitude, that's going to make it even worse.
It makes it worse. And, I think actually, Michael, I think that these writers want Black people to feel helpless and dependent and expropriate their agency. Why? Because victimology, and it's a very un-American thing, victimology pays, and it pays by exploiting white guilt. And if you can exploit white people and make them feel guilty for being white, they will pay a lot of money, $15,000 to hear you speak, which is what he gets per speech.
Wow.
They will pay $15,000 to hear you speak, to tell them how wicked and smelly and bad and evil and nefarious they are, and what kinds of moral malfeasance they continue to commit. So I think these, and you see it in Black academia. I call it Black academia with these Black academics. Mm. But you see it among the Black cognoscenti, where they really, in some sense, do want not to empower Black people, but they want they want to be a managerial class over a set of helpless Black people, because it's a cottage industry that pays, because it pays through exploiting white people and inducing guilt, which implies wrongdoing when the majority of whites that they're addressing have done no wrong. They're just going about their business, living their lives, trying to make good for their families. But if you make somebody feel guilty enough, they'll pay for atonement, redemption, and commit acts of contrition. So I think there's something quite nefarious in their motives.
Yeah. Who's paying?
You know?
Who's paying for those kind of speeches, and who's buying those books? Is it liberal white Americans?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Here's from Ibram X. Kendi. This was the most disturbing thing he wrote of all the disturbing things he wrote. The only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. Holy crap, he's proposing the exact opposite of what Dr. King said, which famously is, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. These authors seem to be saying the most important thing anyone can know about you is how much melanin you have in your skin.
That's right. It's an American horror story that they're writing, and it's based on biological collectivism. That is, if your ancestors committed racism, it doesn't even matter. The very fact that you are of a certain, you're white, means that you're guilty by identity, which is the worst form of racism that can be inflicted on a person. Blacks of all number of individuals should be quite aware of how dangerous this is. But I have a new book coming out this year called "What Do White Americans Owe Black," which is up on Amazon. What do white Americans owe Black people? Racial justice in the age of post-oppression. And I really want to put this reparations argument to rest.
Yeah.
And put voices like Ibram Kendi to rest, to expose what this notion of future discrimination looks like. It would be a horrific America. A permanently divided America. Because what these people are really after is power. They're not after conciliation. They're not interested in conciliating with their fellow compatriots, to say nothing of reconciliating. They're not even interested in conciliating, in fellowship. They're interested in, it's a power struggle. They have a sort of siege mentality, and they think that this is a war that, you see, I think, Michael, after the late civil rights, a lot of Blacks just didn't know what to do with themselves. Their identities were forged in the crucibles of oppression. And it gave many Blacks a sense of purpose, a sense of mission, a meaning when you were being oppressed, when you were being held down under what was legitimately then white supremacy, when you had laws that punished people because they were Blacks and held them back because they were Blacks. And upon real emancipation, what I call the third founding, the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1972 Employment Act, a lot of Black people are left in an existential dilemma, like these people. I wouldn't say most, I'd say a lot, and don't know what to do with their lives because they're just no ordinary people and want to be held up. They're terribly narcissistic, want to be held up as, almost like religious icons. And this is the America that they want to really paint, a divided America that pits Blacks against whites, keep whites in a state of permanent guilt and vigilance, and extract as much money. They're race hustlers, they're pimps, race pimps, and that's just, I don't mince words with these kinds of issues. I just
no,
think
you sure don't.
The truth has to be spoken about it, and it's very dangerous, because I think most Black people are like most white people. They're decent, hardworking, they want the best for themselves, but too many Blacks fall for this kind of victimology because in some sense they've never been offered an alternative. And when they have been, they've been told that you're selling out, or you're being inauthentic, your Blackness. And so I think individuals such as myself have to paint a different picture an alternative that is, I think, far healthier.
Well, you do that in this book, I think, just beautifully, and I'm looking forward to reading the next book. So you're saying it's not just get the checkbook out and cut us all a check. It's more than that. It's political power. It's economic power, social, cultural power, almost like a religion in the sense of original sin, like Christianity. You need a savior because you're born in sin.
That's right. That's right. And it starts in the late '60s with the culture, where the culture wars really started with the rise of Black studies, and then we had from Black studies we had gay studies and queer studies, and then we had women's studies, and then we had Chicano studies. We had all kinds of studies. These had nothing to do with discipline. These were all social justice studies, where the social justice warriors emerged. They were all about advocacy. They're all about the primacy of achieving equity over the primacy of knowledge.
Mm.
And there began the struggle for power, where you saw, students taking over entire buildings, and administrators and bureaucrats bowing like little stupid beta idiots to these bullies and capitulating to their demands. And we're seeing the results today in cancel culture, in the totalitarian left, who wants to sort of control free speech and shut down free speech, and anything that departs from orthodoxy is castigated. So yes, it's more than just financial power.
I'm remembering that video of the president of Evergreen University in Washington, where Brett Weinstein and Heather Hayne were professors. And there's that scene where the students have surrounded him. He's white and they're various shades of color, yelling and screaming at him. And then he's trying to make a point, like, I'm on your side. And they're like, put your hands down. Waving your hands is a white power thing. Okay, so he puts his hand. And it was like this guy just handed over everything, his whole job, to the mob. It was embarrassing and painful to watch. But you're seeing that now in a lot of places. Again, whites are afraid to say anything because they might be canceled or yelled at or whatever.
Well, the dangerous thing is that, I mean, this is one thing among adults who ought to know better. But this is the kind of inculcation that is going on through K through 12, where I heard recently a friend was telling me that his son was made to who's white, was made to put his hand beside a brown paper bag, and was told that something like, I don't remember who told me this story, but it's not a friend of mine. The person to whom it happened is not a friend, but this person was a friend, saying, and if your skin is a color of the paper bag, you are part of the problem.
Oh my God. Again, we just have to get past this constantly obsessing about race. I thought by now we'd be way past it, after decades post Dr. King's dream. But even the institutionalized ticking the boxes. What is your race? And again, it's just like, okay, so this is the most important thing you need to know about me. Now, I know the government has its reasons to keep track of that kind of stuff, but it's not moving us past race. My wife's from Germany, Cologne, Germany, and so when she moved here to be with me, she was shocked about the amount of race that just gets discussed every day. It's on the news, it's on all the talk shows, and in Germany they have their other issues, but not race. It's like, you guys are obsessed with race. It's all you talk about. That and Hitler, as you pointed out. Every other documentary on cable is about Hitler and the Nazis. She goes, we got over that guy a long time ago. What's with you Americans? It does seem peculiarly an American thing to be obsessed with race, even though we're all trying to get past it. At some point, just stop talking about it.
Well, I mean, I would stop being addicted to forms of discrimination. Stop being addicted to issues that actually have nothing to do with race. I mean, so for example, there are just disparities between the races that have nothing to do with racism at all. I mean, when we see the NBA that's packed with black players, we don't accuse them of being racist against Asians. There are certain disparities that are not causally linked to either explicit or implicit racism. I mean, I am a philosopher. There are about 130 Black philosophers with PhDs, including those from the Caribbean and Africa. And there are 10,000, between 10 and 11,000 people with PhDs in philosophy, and they happen to be white. Now, I can tell you as an academic of over 24 years that if you are a Black person with a C average, they will send a jet plane for you, especially if you're a male, because you're considered an endangered species. So it's not like philosophy departments are not trying to recruit philosophy majors. Philosophy is just a very abstract discipline that a lot of Blacks don't go into.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Asians don't go into philosophy either. They go into the hard sciences. And you can try all you want to be a salesperson for philosophy. There are just very few. I've seen it over 24 years. I've conducted fairs and seminars to try to recruit. They're just not attracted to it for whatever reason. That could change over time with more familiarity with the subject, but it's not due to explicit racism that's barring Blacks from entering the field of philosophy, right? We need to stop being addicted to our interpretation, how we interpret the world, and how we causally link some of those interpretations to explicit racism. That's just false. It's like witch doctrine, really.
Yeah, there's always going to be differences depending on the field. In my sport of cycling, last year in the Tour de France, there was one Black cyclist, one out of the 190, whatever. And the camera crew was always on him, like, here he is. Oh, he's in the breakaway. Oh my God. Like, this is, and, is the sport of cycling racist? No. People are free to compete. They're free to try to join any, you just have to be good. And, it takes years, and you got to have the equipment, and who knows what reasons Blacks are more likely to go into basketball than cycling. I don't know, but it isn't racism. My other favorite example is astronomy clubs, amateur astronomy clubs. It's almost all, nerdy white guys. And there's almost no women. Are they misogynistic? Did they not like women? No, they would be thrilled to have some women join them in the observatory dome all night. No, it's not that. It's just, who knows, whatever, interests, people have different interests, and nothing more than that.
That's right.
But so you're saying that, let's get to more serious things like educational differences, white-Black educational differences, income differences, and so on. In the current culture, it's just automatically thought to be, well, that's because of racism. But you're saying it has different causal vectors.
I think there are different causal factors. Some might be reducible to issues of race. Some might not. What I reject are absolute, categorical, monocausal explanations for all phenomena that don't fit under a single metric. So we see disparities, or we see inequalities, or the term that the other side likes to use, these inequities, and we immediately assume it must be racism. And there are other explanations that are not tied to racism. And one of the reasons that I think books like people like Kendi and Coates and even Cornel West, whom I met years ago in graduate school, are problematic is that they, among other things, they would like to not do the hard work of investigating why, for example, certain disparities are linked to, like, pathologies, actually, within certain cultures. I've gotten into a lot of trouble for saying, all cultures are not equal. I mean, the practices and the beliefs and the ethos that we find in cultures are not all equal. America is not the equal of Saudi Arabia or Iran. And, when you look at certain facts, like 72% of African-American children are born out of wedlock, and about 70% of those born out of wedlock are linked to poverty. And males who are born into single-family households are twice as likely to commit crimes than those born in two-parent households. To link that to slavery is wrong, because actually under segregation, up until 1960, I think the marriage rate among Blacks was out of birth wedlock was like 22%. So it's after the 1960s when we had these programs that disincentivized, I think, Black fathers from taking care of their children, because if you with the war on poverty, what that produced was it's not an incentive to have more children, but it certainly disincentivize you from
Mm.
having more children. The state would reward you from having more children, where your procreative choices and your procreative responsibilities became the responsibilities of everyone else. So there are certain pathologies that exist within certain cultures that are just not politically correct to talk about, that have more to do with inequities or inequalities than
Yeah.
ostensibly pointing to something like racism.
Yeah. Daniel Patrick Moynihan wrote that his famous paper about the black family disintegrating to 25% out of wedlock births. And I think that was like early 60s, mid 60s, maybe. And now
Yes, that was mid-60s.
Yeah. So now it's 70%. So how does this work? So let's say you're a single mom, you need some help financially, you can't even feed your kids. So the state says, okay, we're gonna give you a little money each month and food stamps and so on. Seems like the right thing to do. Then maybe she starts dating somebody, and then maybe they're moving toward marriage, and then she realizes, well, if I marry this guy, then no, I don't get the check every month anymore. And so we'll just live together and not get married. We know what happens with that. Without that commitment, what difference does it make? It's just a piece of paper. Well, it does make a difference. Actually, when you actually sign the contract and you make a verbal and written commitment, you're less likely to leave. And when conflicts arise, which they inevitably do in all marriages, you're more likely to stick it out if you have that commitment. So that what I'm doing is kind of just trying to drill down what exactly happens when you say disincentivizes. You're talking about something as pragmatic as that.
That's right. That's right. When the state becomes your surrogate husband, to whom you're married, for financial recompensation of the children that you've had, there is no incentive that you have for not having more children that you can be financially responsible for, and it also is terribly emasculating. It must be very emasculating for Black men also, who should not be demonized. I think that those same persons who, in different circumstances, would have probably taken care of their children, have no incentive to do so, because the state has usurped the role of the Black father by taking care of his children for him.
Mm-hmm.
Drag him to court and prosecute him for or garnish his wages. He has a child, he should pay. So it's terribly emasculating to Black men, and it's terribly crippling of the agency of a significant number of Black women who have more children than they can be financially responsible for.
Yeah.
But these are things that you can't say. You can't say these things. You're not supposed to talk about these things.
Well,
really.
we are. We're talking about it right here, and we're going to post this online. So maybe we'll both be canceled. I don't care. I mean, these things need to be said. I mean, the reparations thing is coming because, this idea. Well, we can't just cut people a check in trillions of dollars. Well, we just did twice. In 2020, and now we're about to have another massive stimulus because of COVID. So apparently the government can do that. The question is, should it do that? I was thinking about when I was reading your book, the case for reparations. Well, if Blacks have a case, what about Native Americans? I mean, certainly they would have every bit as victimization moral standing as Blacks. For particularly the confiscation of their land. And then what did the government do to make up for the horrors of how they treated Native Americans? They put them on reservations and put them and gave them basically a welfare check every month, which completely destroyed their cultures. And so I take it your fear about reparations is not just can we afford to print trillions of dollars more or whatever it would be. What does it do to the psyche of the people getting the money?
Right. It makes you an economic supplicant. It makes you a horrible mendicant, which is psychologically devastating to an individual. And I don't think that any Black person with any semblance of pride and dignity in his or her body would accept reparations. But even more than that, Michael, one of the things that I argue in the forthcoming book, What Do White Americans Owe Black People, is that Blacks have been receiving reparations since the 1960s. That is, I take the affirmative action programs
Mm.
that I think actually weren't probably necessary at one point, to given the collusion between the state
Hmm.
and private businesses and corporations in excluding blacks from um, actually occupying certain legal professions.
Hmm.
Um, so with reparations, with affirmative action, I should say, with the rise of the welfare state, there are all sorts of ways in which reparations have been occurring on a vast continuum since the 1960s towards blacks. I talk about cultural reparations in the universities, in the rise of these Black Studies programs, for example, and social justice programs that was granting sovereignty and autonomy and autonomous status to almost a statehood to blacks within the discipline.
Hmm.
So reparations has been occurring in various forms in this country towards blacks. I would never say that the 1964 Civil Rights Act was a form of reparations. It's simply, I think, granting blacks full standing before the law is their inalienable right. But there have been what I call reparative moments since the 1960s that I detail in the book, and so that's one argument. The other argument is that aside from whether it's strategically feasible, it's immoral. That is, it's unethical to extract money from someone or a group of people on the basis of racial affiliation. And there are people on the alt left who make the argument that some sort of ancestral argument, which is putative of false, because the majority of white people today, their ancestors came after the Civil War. Even if they did own slaves, so what? You cannot punish someone for that is collectivism, that is biological collectivism for the sins that their ancestors made. There's no one today who is a slave that's alive in America, and there's no one today who is a slave owner in America. So I come from it more from a moral perspective, not that it's even divisive, because sometimes we need healthy forms of divisiveness in our culture. This notion of wholesale unity is a bunch of malarkey. I don't want wholesale unity with a communist. I'm not a communist. I want there to be some sort of healthy divisiveness between my views and his views. But it's immoral because it's punishing a group of people solely on the basis of racial ascriptive identity. And the other side is that, well, they enjoy white privilege. Well, if you're going to be ethically consistent, then you'd have to punish any person who enjoys some kind of dominion in the world based on their privilege. Therefore, you're going to have to punish me for having 4 college degrees. You're going to have to punish someone who sent their kid to private school. You're going to have to punish someone who's linguistically privileged, who speaks 5 languages, and can command a certain kind of, or leverage a certain kind of, more opportunities are going to be available to that person than someone who's just a monolinguist. So the idea of basing it on something like an inherited privilege is also very, very problematic and quite unethical.
So you would distinguish that, say, from Germany paying Israel reparations because of the Holocaust, because those victims are still alive, and the perpetrators, at least until recently, have still been alive, and there's a difference there.
There's a difference there, and you can ostensibly point to theft. I mean, there are artworks, there are homes that were stolen, there were businesses that were appropriated and destroyed. It's quid pro quo. I mean, you did this to my family. You stole my business. You stole my artwork. You stole my jewelry. I mean, the invidious comparisons that people make between the Holocaust and slavery in terms of reparations. It's like beggars comparing swords. It's disgusting, and it's uncalled for. It's a completely different situation. Hitler intended to annihilate an entire ethnic group and the religious group from the face of the earth. There was no annihilatory or annihilation. As horrible as slavery was, and it was tragic, horrific birth defect America was born with, the goal of the plantation owners was not to annihilate the slaves. It was
Right.
to expropriate illegally and improperly. Well, it wasn't illegal at the time, but I would say immorally appropriate their labor, but not to wipe them out as a race. Quite the
Right.
opposite, to reproduce them. The situation, I mean, we could take hours to discuss how.
Yeah. Yeah. What about the
it's
argument of
a
this?
case of mixing categories.
Yeah, since you mentioned labor, essentially white America has benefited from centuries of free labor by blacks, and that has accumulated, even though personally I didn't get any, but my culture, my white society has benefited from that through all the investments in construction and banking and whatnot. I think there's an economic argument for reparations along those lines, right? Multi-generational wealth that gets accumulated on the backs of black slaves for centuries, and you're still getting the benefit of it now, white America, so you need to pay back.
Well, look, as I said, there have been three foundings in this country: the 1776, I think Lincoln's Gettysburg Address and the Civil War and the Emancipation Declaration, and the third founding, I would put it in 1964. Short of a bloated, horrific, totalitarian state that would not look like the United States of America, to go back and retroactively try to atone for every single injustice that this country has afflicted on every single previously disenfranchised group would turn this country into a ghastly phenomenon that I don't even think blacks themselves would want to live in. The fact is that this is a country that is always existing in a state of moral becoming. It has at its heart what I call a reflexivity clause, where it tries to look at the past and the past wrongs it has committed, and it tries to remedy those wrongs. We no longer have miscegenation laws on the books. Gays and lesbians can get married. Blacks enjoy full freedom before the law. We need to be moving forward and I don't mean progressive in the way that the part that uses progressive.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Let me use the word evolutionary manner, and stop harkening back. This is the problem. America is the one thing I like about America is that it's a country that does not encourage you really to linger too much on your roots. It's one that forces you to focus on your destiny, on your future. And this fixation with the past strikes me as nothing but nostalgic sentimentality. And I say, get over it. Just we need to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
We have to move forward.
Yeah. What is your opinion of UBI, since we're on the subject? So at least it's not race-based, but the idea that every American gets a check for $1,000 a month. This is Andrew Yang's idea. Just taking the economics of it out of the equation for the moment, morally speaking.
What gives Andrew Yang or anyone the right to determine that expropriating someone's money to give to another person? But what metric, what criterion is being used here to determine that money from people who have honestly earned their wealth can be divvied up? Wealth is privately owned. Wealth is not a national treasure trove. It's when people talk about the wealth of a country, we need to correct them and say, no, it's the wealth of private individuals that we're talking about. No, I think that idea is ridiculous. It's veering towards. You see, there are incremental ways to veer a country towards socialism, incrementally, and you do it through sentimental means, through emotional means, through the weak people's pocketbooks, or you hit them at their weak spots where they can't rationally think about, well, what's really going on here? This is just one move that is bent on gearing us towards changing our political DNA, which is not, socialism is not in our political DNA. $1,000 a month. Where does that idea come from? For what purpose? We're talking about giving $1,000 to able-bodied people who can work.
Everybody,
So
even Bill Gates would get a check for $1,000 a month.
It's malarkey. I think I've never heard of such stupidity in my life, and it's more than malarkey. It's actually, it's unethical because it's sending a certain message that we have an entitlement to the income earnings of other people. We have no such entitlement to the income earnings of anyone at all. It's a form of, I would call, moral eugenics in the worst sense of the term. That is, it's trying to sort of retrain the sensibilities of people incrementally into thinking that entitlement to the unearned is your rightful entitlement. And we need to debunk that shibboleth right now and say that $1,000 a month is coming from, just because everybody's getting $1,000 a month, what's the justification for it? What are the philosophical grounds for it? What are the moral grounds for it? And have those conversations rather than just sort of accept it as it's coming from a benevolent premise. It's not coming from a benevolent premise. It's coming from a premise that I think it's quite nefarious.
I think the argument
for reasons I've explained.
I think the argument is something along the lines of, well, we're already taxing people, including corporations, to pay for roads, the interstate, the police force, the court system, the military, and on and on. So this would just be one more equivalent of a tax to take care of the people that have suffered under the increasing income inequality that has risen dramatically within the United States over the last few decades. Some people and corporations make so much more now that it feels like the other people are, the normal people, the little people or whatever, are being left out. And therefore it would be something like infrastructure tax.
Well, I say abolish the income tax, like certain states then.
Okay.
Right? Abolish the income tax and let the government do its proper role. The government is doing far more than a government in a free society should be doing. That's why we pay so much in taxes, right? So abolish the income tax or give people tax credit for education. I mean, people are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to send their children to schools or daycare centers. Working class people pay a lot of money to send their children to daycare centers. Don't tax that part of their income. See, they think they're very slick with this notion of $1,000. It's a socialist move. Simply tax people less. Take less money out of their pay. The money that I would, if I were a parent, that I would take $300 and in some cases $300 a week to finance childcare for my child. Don't tax that part of my income.
I like that. I like that. I'll go for that. Yeah, that's another way of redistributing the income, as it were.
Right, and it's a lot fairer because the government then can't appropriate your money and then dispose of it without any kind of oversight committee.
Right.
Which appraises the ethicality and the practicality of how that money gets allocated. So, if I know that I'm earning a certain amount of money and I don't have children, but if I had children and I had 2 children to put through school, and I knew that the money that it cost to put those children through childcare was not going to be taxed, and I would get a tax voucher to send my children to a school, and I would get tax credits for that. I think that's a far more, from the perspective of individual rights, actually.
Well, as you know,
the proper role of what a government should do.
Teachers' unions are against that because they're afraid that then parents will choose the better schools, and therefore we'll have kind of a educational income inequality, as it were, where the poorer schools get even worse because they're getting even less money. Because of course the parents are choosing the better schools because they want their kids to get a better education. And then
that's another thing.
The last piece of that is that then some kids would fall through the cracks.
Well, the first thing would be just, the ideal situation for me would be to abolish every single teachers' union in this country, get rid of public education completely. It's disastrous. It's propagandistic. We see what's going on in K through 12, where we just realized that, gee whiz, Qatar and Saudi Arabia are not only giving $100 million to Harvard and Princeton, they're also financing K through 12 under the guise of teaching Arabic. But guess what? They're teaching Islamicism and jihadism in K through 12. This is common knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So get rid of the teachers union, put some of these unemployed PhDs to work, to put them in the high schools. I don't see why you need a teacher certification or teachers need to be unionized. Abolish public education completely and privatize it. Promote charter schools. Blacks are dying. Black parents are dying for their kids to get into charter schools.
Mm-hmm.
This is a misrepresentation I want to correct in the media that somehow blacks don't like charter schools. Black parents know the horrific education that their children are receiving in their public schools based on their zip codes, and are longing for a chance to get into charter schools.
Yeah.
So, to hell with this teachers union. To get rid of them.
So I'm on board with most of that. I think the counter argument would be, if all schools were private, then you'd have some students falling through the cracks. They're not going to get to go to any school because capitalism will drive the price of the education up, and only the rich will be able to educate their kids.
Well, we know that's a bunch of malarkey. We know that the market doesn't work that way, because it's not in the interest of the market to exclude a vast underclass of people.
Mm-hmm. Someone
with a better mousetrap, of course, will come up and find a way through scholarships, through cheaper tuitions, to help poor people finance education. I mean, look, the price of the iPhone keeps going down year after year.
Yeah.
The price of computers. I mean, the computer was very expensive at first. Now it's a gadget that almost everyone has, like an iPhone. An iPhone used to be, you remember early on when the iPhone came out, it was just well-to-do people who had iPhones. Now every Hottentot has everyone has an iPhone now, right?
Right.
So this idea somehow that it would deprive poor people of an education, I think that's just false. I think we would have competition among educational institutions that would actually have to compete among themselves to offer the best kind of services. And it would not be in the financial interest of someone such as myself who would love to start a private school. It would not be in my interest if I looked out at the vast landscape and saw, well, only these people from the upper echelons can go to this school. It would be in my interest to find a way to make sure that those persons who can't afford $40,000 a year in tuition can do it. Look, Michael, in the 1960s, there were a ton of black private schools that were thriving. The literature is out there. Readers should see this, that blacks who face rampant discrimination in public schools and were not permitted because of lack of integration to, in their own public schools, face lack of funding, formed their own private schools, had their own private organizations, had their own private insurance companies. I'm just not buying that. I wouldn't buy that argument or take it too seriously.
In any case, the argument that, then some students won't get an education or they'll fall through the cracks or whatever, that's already happening in public schools. Particularly LA County public schools are just a disaster. I forget what the exact number is, but it's a significant two-digit number of students that don't even graduate from high school, and those that do are reading at like a sixth grade level. They're not really ready for college. They need to go to community college and so forth. So how well is the experiment working under the current system? Well, not very.
It's not. And we see how black students who go to Catholic schools or charter schools, who migrate from the horrific public schools into the Catholic schools or the charter schools, we see how at an unprecedented rate their cognitive abilities catch up to their white counterparts at an astonishing rate.
Yeah.
So empirically, I just think that that's untenable.
I was just talking to my wife last night about we have a 4.5-year-old son, and we're just now starting to shop around to schools. She went to a Catholic school in Cologne, but high school in Germany at the gymnasium is about the equivalent of a 4-year college degree here in the United States. She's as educated and as competent as anyone I know with a bachelor's degree, for example. Now, I'm an atheist, so I'm not crazy about all the Catholic religious dogma, but Actually, if they don't do too much of that stuff and he gets a better education there, I'd send him to a Catholic school. Because if it's the Jesuits with their dedication to knowledge and learning, well, then that's worth a lot.
It's worth a lot. I went to a Jesuit school and a private Catholic school, and you were really taught these critical thinking skills to argue back. And people have this mythology that Catholic schools are these indoctrination centers. They're actually not. I mean, they have a dogma, they have a doctrine, but they teach you how to think.
Yeah,
and they give you a method of cognition that teaches you how to question the authority of that which you're being subjected to, which is a wonderful thing.
Yeah. So let's get back to your story. I'm always interested in the question of how lives turn out. Genetics, upbringing, family, mentors, and the role of luck. To what extent obviously you made it mostly on your own, but you had some mentors and family, and you had a good education. So just kind of walk us through how somebody that can come to the United States with $120 and go to Georgia of all places, which is not exactly the most racially tolerant place decades ago, but still you did it. So what do you attribute it to in terms of the balance of that?
Well, I must say I owe an enormous debt to my mother and my grandmother, who facilitated the path by getting me and my brother a green card in the first place. But my mother is someone to whom I have to say I would be extraordinarily indebted to, because she worked extremely. My parents divorced when I was quite young. My father is a schizophrenic, and we didn't realize that he was schizophrenic until much, much later.
Yeah.
I just thought he was irresponsible. My parents divorced at 7, and my mother was a banker, a young banker. She got married at 18. She had me at 19. My brother at 20, and she was divorced at 24, and raised us both and sacrificed an enormous amount of her youth, really, to send us to the best private schools, not just in Jamaica, but I would say the entire Caribbean. And so, I started high school when I was 11, real high school, not junior high. Proper high school, because it was based on the British model. And my mother never skimped, so she gave me she provided that foundation for me. And when we decided to come to America, my mother thought we were way too young. I was 20, my brother was 19. She gave up her entire career and came to give us moral support. She couldn't contribute to my financial school fees, but there was a place to stay. And I worked for 45 hours a week, went to school full time, graduated magna cum laude at the top of my class, working 45 hours a week and going to school full time before I won a scholarship to do my PhD. So there is something about the luck of being born in a middle class family and with a certain background. My mother also, I must say, spotted very early on in me that I had a love of reading. So I was reading voraciously by the time I was 4. I was reading at the age of 3, but really quite voraciously by the time I was 4 or 5, and would just ply me with these 700-page books and these 800-page novels. It could be anything from a Harlequin romance to a textbook in biology or something in physics that my poor brain just felt overloaded by. My mother just kept on, feeding me the books, and she would write out like 17 words out of the dictionary every day, and she would go off to work during summer breaks, and she'd call me up and she'd say, "So what does preposterous mean, and what does obstreperous mean?" And all these big words that she had me memorizing and not looking in the dictionary, and then she'd have me use them in a sentence. And she herself would say, "I'm no intellectual," but she was rearing one in her own way.
Yeah.
So and I have dedicated so many of my books to my mother because, without her efforts, I just wouldn't be here.
Yeah, you don't get to choose your parents. That's lucky you. Also, you're obviously smart, and we know intelligence / IQ is highly heritable. So you're lucky you were born smart. So I think the argument someone like Andrew Yang would make is, well, some people were born not so smart. And so we got to give them a hand up because they can't make it like you did, because you got to go to school and read and you were smart enough to absorb it all. Well, how do you counter an argument like that?
Well, I would say that, in the lottery of life, we're not all uh, equally endowed. So, I mean, there are other disadvantages that I have been afflicted with, and other qualities that I wish I had that I don't have. I mean, this idea. This is the thing that the far left really am annoyed with. The idea of playing God, or thinking that you can play God and sort of fix the cosmic injustices, or the way that the genetic lottery didn't work out in favor of certain groups of people, is very, very dangerous. What you do is you create the conditions under which people can matriculate according to their abilities, and you provide them with a milieu in which opportunities can flourish and that they can take advantage of. I would say to Andrew Yang, you read the story of Mike in my book, the gardener who left Jamaica semi-literate, could barely read, could barely speak English, because he spoke the dialect, and came to America and started mowing lawns with one lawnmower, and then eventually owned. Ended up owning 4 tractor mowers and hiring Mexicans under him, and ended up owning a house bigger than my mother's house. I've been in the hospital for surgery, and I've met Jamaican nurses who've worked as domestic servants in Jamaica, barely able to speak English. They've come to America. They watch television. They have, I still have my Jamaican accent. They have a strong American accent. They're committed. They're corrected all their grammatical infelicities. And I'm gone to school, night school, to get their nursing degree. So the people like Andrew Yang, again, presuppose that all these factors that they point to in some resolute, determinate way shape your destiny.
Yeah.
And one of the things I love about America is that America allows you the opportunity that no matter where you're from, no matter where you're emerged, it is the place on which you can graft yourself and start over from scratch. From the illiterate maid in Jamaica who can come here and learn standard English and acquire a nursing degree and buy her own house and send her children to college and never depend on welfare, never depend on government handouts. We underestimate the potency of human creativity when we short circuit people the power of their own capability by saying we have to give you a handout. Never do more for people than they are willing to do for themselves, first of all, is part of my philosophy.
There's your chapter title for your next book. I like that. Yeah, here's how I think about it. That, most of us are not good at most things that are out there that could be done. I mean, when I look at all the different careers, just, my colleagues in academia do, most of them I can't do. I'm terrible at foreign languages, for example. And I originally was interested in astronomy, but I looked at calculus. I went, I have no chance of mastering calculus and all this stuff to be an astrophysicist or whatever. But in the social sciences and statistics and research methodologies, I could do that. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do that. In other words, I'm not good at these 20 things, but I could do that one thing. So that's what I'm going to do. Mm-hmm. And then when I got my PhD in history of science, I had to master 2 foreign languages. And French and German, and I thought, okay. I looked at German, I thought, I have no chance of these words are this long. Okay, so I convinced them that, I have a master's degree in statistics, so that's kind of the language of science, and I'm doing the history of science. Yes. So they said, okay, you can have that as one of your foreign languages. And then French, it was all I could do to pass the French test. It was terrible. I never really mastered French. It's like studying for Jeopardy. I don't really know what Shakespeare plays are about. I just know the names of the characters, right? It was like that. But it seems to me that, exactly what you said. It's like just find the thing you're good at. Most things most people can't do. So why have this cosmic justice? Like, well, we're going to make sure everybody can do everything. They can't. Just by dint of what you're born with. So it doesn't really matter what you're born with, the luck or bad luck of being, well, in my case, I wish I was taller. I wish I was skinnier because I'm a cyclist, and I wish my VO2 uptake was higher so I could climb better. It's just not. It's just, so I go flatter, longer rides rather than shorter, faster rides. That's just the way it is.
That's the way it is. And Michael, the wonderful thing about our great republic is that it says to you, you might have been dealt an unfair hand, a deck of cards, but we give you many, many ways of playing your hand.
Right.
And you can fail. America's a country where you can fail, and it gives you permission to fail and pick up and start again. I love to look at farmers.
Oh, yeah.
And how they don't commit suicide when hurricanes or not hurricanes, but mostly in the Midwest where tornadoes wipe them out. They don't commit suicide. They start from scratch. No bitterness. No they must have despair, but they start from scratch. I've had immigrant friends who've lost businesses, went bankrupt, and in the old-fashioned American way, chin up, chin to the wind.
Yeah.
Start over from scratch and renew yourself. So there are many ways of playing the hand that nature has dealt one, and America, I think, is the best place that gives you that opportunity to play your hand in many, many different ways.
Yeah. Yeah, there's several other misunderstandings I think I'll highlight here, is that, first of all, there's the fixed pie of wealth, as if, if that guy over there is making 10 times more than me, I'm getting a smaller slice because he's getting a bigger slice, as if it's fixed. Of course, it's not fixed. It's expanding. Mm-hmm. And then it's the idea that, these people in that income, let's say that they're the bottom quintile of the five categories that economists use. We got to help them get out of there. Well, the implication is that those people are always going to be in the fifth quintile. In fact, what happens is They move to the fourth, the third, the second, the first, and a lot of the people in the first quintile slide back down. I mean, it's not; these aren't fixed categories that people are automatically gifted into or punished by being into. That they move around a lot. And Thomas Sowell makes this point about income redistribution. It implies that the income was distributed in the first place by the income czar. Okay, you get this much and you get that much. That's not how it works. So redistributing it is based on the fallacy that it was distributed from the top down in the first place, which it wasn't.
It wasn't. I love Thomas Sowell. That's right. I'm so glad you made that point. Yeah. And yes. Yeah.
Here's what you write about. I love this passage here toward the end of your book. We have overcome. Just that one word. Oh, boy. Very inspirational. But I have a feeling I know what your critics think about that. Anyway, being an American has always meant steadfastly holding to specific values. And it is values, life-enhancing moral qualities we develop in our characters, which propel life forward and push our own lives into the forefront of our consciousness. So we develop a sustained and intimate relationships with our moral lives, which are responsible for keeping us alive as human beings. We are not alienated from our human nature precisely because we hold moral values. Those moral values are anchored by our commitment to an American system that protects them, that says nothing and no one can ever alienate us from our core. And nothing can pull us as Americans, all of us holding differing beliefs and concepts of the good life, but united in our commitment to the sacred first civilization that allows us to remain connected as one nation. We remain connected by a very American maxim that announces the following, and here you put it in italics. Your personal beliefs may differ from mine. Your conception of the good life you have carved out for yourself may be strange to me. But so long as you respect my right to hold my life in my own name and do not violate my individual rights, and so long as you do not try to foist your values and conception of your notion of the good on me, then I will defend and uphold your right to hold your personal values in your personal name. Man, that says it right there in one page. That's it.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's it. That's it.
That's great.
That you're a professional philosopher, I have to ask you about, you talk about agency a lot in the book. How do you get around the free will determinism, or are you a compatibilist, or how do you think about that particular hot button issue in philosophy?
Well, I subscribe to the view that volition is part of the human condition, and that it's built into human nature to So there are a lot of presuppositions that one would have to hold to disclaim free will. So um, I tend to take the route that free will exists and ostensibly point to the way that people behave that would show that they would have to have free will in order to engage in those actions. And then I say, those people who say you can't, so when people say, prove to me that free will doesn't exist, I said, in logic, you're not required to prove a negative.
Right.
I simply adduce certain actions that result from an agent, and to make sense of those actions, one would have to presuppose that that agent was acting freely and of his own or her own volition, and that's built into the human condition. And that's, I mean, of course, I've read all the literature and on free will, and going back to the moderns and Leibniz and Descartes and so on and so forth. But and I've read Dennett and the contemporary debates around that. But I and I respect those debates. I just tend to take it as almost self-evident that if we are to make sense of some of the actions that we do engage in and that make sense in the world ostensibly, then we would have to presuppose that an agent were acting freely of his own accord or her own accord, and that there were no prior causal antecedent phenomena acting to impede that will in any way. I mean, if you assume that there is a God that is acting to impede your will, that's a different argument. I think you could still have a belief that there is a God, but it's an absentee God who just has created the world and has left people. I know lots of rational deists hold beliefs in God, but don't think that, okay, so he's left them free and reason is an attribute of man, and that God does not interfere with or introduce any kind of causal phenomena that would compromise the agency of the will of the individual. And so that's the way I tend to approach it, really.
Mm-hmm.
And it just makes life a lot easier in terms of practically, in terms of culpability and responsibility, and in terms of actually the sense of efficacy that I feel I can wield in the world. I just presuppose that in the absence of my having free will, I wouldn't have that kind of efficacious management. I say that quite literally, management of my destiny. If I didn't have that free will.
Yeah. Yeah, here's how I think about it. We live in a determined universe, as scientists tell us. There's a causal net to the universe, but we're part of the net, pushing and pulling the vectors that are pushing and pulling on us back, particularly if you're sentient and conscious and aware of what these factors are. So, Dennett makes the point about degrees of freedom. I have more degrees of freedom than my dog. He has more degrees of freedom than the insect walking across the plant. Whatever, you have more options that you can choose from. And if you're aware of your choices and aware that you're aware and so on in a meta way, you can kind of tweak the causal net to go in the direction you want it to go. So my simple example is, I know I shouldn't eat too many chocolate chip cookies, but I really like them. And I know if I go to the store on a hungry and an empty stomach, I'm more likely to buy them than not. So I'll eat something before I go food shopping. So that's me kind of projecting future Shermer, because I know what future Shermer's like. So I'm going to adjust now for him. And in a way that, we still retain some volition there, because I'm aware of what, the various factors are influencing me.
Right. And that's the kind of, and so free will doesn't presuppose omniscience nor omnipotence, and it doesn't presuppose clairvoyance, right? It there's a finite set of circumstances or phenomena, I like to use that word because it just covers so much, over which you can exercise or exhibit mastery. And so we can still talk about free will, but even in a limited way, as opposed to talk about the will is causally determined by I think the burden of proof lies on the other side to ostensibly show, well, in what sense is my free will being causally determined by these phenomena that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Like ostensibly point to them and show how the decision I'm going to make right now to do X, Y, or Z has already been predetermined. It's a kind of I think the non-free willers are guilty. That's a horrible non-philosophical term. I shouldn't be speaking that way. I think it's a kind of, it really is, it might sound funny to you, but it strikes me as a form of mysticism. It smacks of mysticism, really. In the sense that you're ascribing causal reference to a behavior or to a will that you are in some sense incapable of accurately or scientifically identifying.
Yeah. I was just looking up in the Moral Arc my discussion of Adrian Raine's book, The Anatomy of Violence. So here he talks about some of these people that have like a brain tumor, or the guy that was a pedophile. He was arrested for pedophilia, but in fact he had a brain tumor. I mean, he's perfectly normal. He was a teacher, and he started molesting his stepdaughter at some point, and he got arrested. He was in big trouble, and then all of a sudden, I think he was standing in front of the doctor, and he peed in his pants, and he's just standing there in the hallway like nothing happened. And the doctor thought, there's something wrong with this guy. People don't just pee in their pants in the public and just stand there, right? So let's scan his brain. They scan his brain. He's got a tumor. Oh, he's got a tumor. Okay. So they take the tumor out. He no longer has any feelings about pedophilia. They're gone. But then all of a sudden, like 6 months later, the wife finds kitty porn on his computer. Okay, scan the brain. The tumor grew back. So there, Raine's point is that these are mitigating examples. If you have this obvious break in your brain, that's causing it, but you and I don't have that. Most people don't have brain tumors. And then he has another discussion of this guy named Donta Page, who was a black man who raped and murdered a white woman in Colorado, and he was on death row. Anyway, so Adrian Raine was on the defense attorney side to try to get him off the death penalty. And but this goes on for like 3 pages of what this kid's life was like, just raised by a single mom. The mom was on crack, and then he was in gangs that he dropped on his head a dozen times and beaten, and it just goes on and on. It's just like the worst upbringing you could possibly have. So Raine then asks, what's the difference between a brain tumor you can see on a scan and this guy's background, which you can't see in any scan? And you just sort of just know what the background is and assume there's obviously some brain damage there. Well,
again, that's flaky because, with a brain tumor, you can ostensibly identify to a T. With a kind of calendrical exactitude, exactly what part of the brain is being identified. With the abused child, there are just too many variables. There are too many things that are being presupposed as causal factors that may actually not be causal factors. And there are too many things that are actually probably mediating the will, but are not causing the will or influencing the will to function in a certain way, but it's not actually causing the will or predetermining the will to act what's the word I'm looking for? Definitively in a certain manner. So I think those sociological explanations are quite fuzzy for me because they lack the kind of exactitude and precision that the science has. The more scientific approach would have. I think I'll use I've used Sam Harris's book. I think I'm going to use The Moral Arc in my honors class next semester in conversation with Augustine. Yeah, I'm always looking for new books.
Okay.
In the contemporary section. So I think I'm going to use The Moral Arc, and I'm going to put that book in conversation with Augustine's one of Augustine's book, because I like to teach a combination of the secular and the religious.
Okay, I'll take that. That sounds good. One final point before we wrap up is the section on your book on Israel, support of Israel or not, in the BLM's movement against Israel. But I think there's kind of an anti-Semitic thread in there. I had no idea the Jewish community supported black civil rights for so long. I didn't know about that background. Just give us a brief history.
Yeah,
of
I
that.
mean, it's in the I'm yeah, I mean, I want people to buy the book, so they should buy the book. But I will say this: if I tell them, they'll just have it. No, I will say, look, Jews are the unsung heroes of the civil rights movement. I mean, from financing aspects of the civil rights movement, as I've mentioned in the book, uh, uh, educationally providing pro bono legal services for civil rights activists who were arrested and had no way of posting bail. In a plethora of ways, Jews played a role in the civil rights movement, which again comes from the Jewish ethical identity of repairing the world.
Right.
And it is very painful to see the Black Lives Matter movement marching into Jewish communities and calling Israel and Jews as being complicit with a genocidal apartheid state.
Mm-hmm.
When Jews, gave office buildings and to say nothing. I mean, the financial part is just obvious for anybody who just even Googles on the internet. But in terms of mentoring, in terms of going on freedom rides, when people talk about whites, I mean, a lot of those whites that we're talking about going on the freedom rides in Mississippi, these were Jewish activists who were accompanying blacks and risking their lives in the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And many of them are lawyers too, who are providing who litigate services, legal services. It's extraordinary. I think an entire book should be written on the Jewish contribution to the civil rights movement. But people are not really taught this.
There's your book after your next book. Well, it always does strike me as amazing that far left progressives and liberals are not more supportive of Israel, or they've kind of turned the other direction. In as much as we know the history of how Jews have been treated for the last 4,000 years, how can you not support the Israel state that says, look, after 4,000 years, we're building our own nation and we got nukes, so don't screw with us. I totally understand that. Of course, anybody would do that. All right, I'm going to wrap up here and just read a final passage that I highlighted in your book. Life belongs to you. Life can be shaped according to your vision and by the grace of its better possibilities. You love life and intend to affirm it by being a co-author in the shaping of a destiny you have faith in. It can only be for your good. There we go. Jason,
thank you.
Hill, thank you for writing this book. Thank you for your important work. We'll have you back on when you have your next book comes out. What do white Americans owe black people? And I think I know the answer to that, but but there we have to go through all the specific arguments because I know those are coming up in public discussion in the next couple of years. So thanks for coming on the show, Jason. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Michael. It was an extraordinary pleasure.
Okay.